So, of course, with the Super Bowl over and frankly almost nothing to talk about, I decided to go back to a trade that happened within this past week and figure out who won the trade. Yes, the trade I am thinking of are the 76ers in the Nets trade. The trade strictly between James Harden and Ben Simmons. Who do you think won the trade? Let me know in the comments before the video starts. But without further ado, before I get into this video, make sure to like, subscribe, turn the notification bell. You guys help me out a little bit. And without further ado, let's get right into this video. Now, of course, getting into the details, the 76ers at first is the first thing we're going to go over. They received James Harden and Paul Millsap. Now, of course, there are a lot of positives of this trade. The 76ers, Ben Simmons' distraction is finally gone. Ben Simmons is finally out of there. He needed to be out of there. I also think the dynamic of James Harden and an MVP-level Joel Embiid is going to work out very, very well for both sides. Joel Embiid's that center, that dominant inside presence that James Harden has always thrived with. And then, of course, on the other side, you have a shooter, a guy that can really spread the floor offensively, a guy, the type of guy, typically, that people like Joel Embiid dominate and thrive with. So I think the dynamic between these two superstars are going to work really, really well. This team will also be a complete offensive convoy. I mean, let's be honest, these dudes might go game after game dropping 30 points each. It's going to be absolutely amazing to watch. And also, I think an aspect that people are not talking about enough on the perimeter, I think James Harden and Matisse Thybulle complement each other nearly perfectly. Matisse Thybulle can take over the defensive priority. He can really defend the best player on the court. And of course, James Harden, he will still have to defend, but he won't have to defend the best guard. He will be able to put his full energy on the offensive side of the ball, which I think for James Harden, an offensive player, that's really, really important. And also Paul Millsap, he can be a pretty useful veteran for this team, a veteran presence, especially as they get further and further into the season and maybe even into the playoffs. Now, of course, going into the negatives about the 76ers getting James Harden and Paul Millsap, I do have a lot of questions about James Harden's hamstring. It's been lingering over the last year or two. It's really, really, really starting to concern me. James Harden is also 32 years old, which is a little bit of a disadvantage age-wise. He is old. He's getting older. He's aging. This is not a guy that you're going to be able to spend a long-term time with. If you want to win, you need to win now. And it seems like the 76ers are going with that approach. And while it is a dangerous approach, it can work. However, James Harden with his injury issues and his age, it can definitely be a disadvantage. I'm also worried about this team in the playoffs. They traded a good portion of their perimeter defense, being Ben Simmons, a guy who really gave them a huge chance in the playoffs against players such as Trae Young. They also traded a lot of shooting, including Seth Curry, who at one point was the best shooter on their team, and Andre Drummond, a guy who was the backup center. He was an amazing, amazing rebounding presence, especially to come in for Joel Embiid. They gave a lot of that up. And James Harden is also not the world's greatest playoff performer. Let's just be honest. James Harden is kind of notorious for not showing out in the playoffs too well. He's notorious for it. It doesn't happen. Everybody talks about, hey, James Harden, amazing player, amazing offensive player, great regular season player, MVP caliber player every year. He's healthy. However, he can't show up in the playoffs. So I'm really worried about the 76ers squad in the playoffs, especially concerning the fact that Embiid and Harden both tend to be injury prone. Both of these guys are superstars, don't get me wrong. But we all know Joel Embiid has an injury history. He missed the first 2 years of his career with injury. James Harden, he tends to get injured later into the season. He's already dealing with that hamstring issue. So it can definitely be a factor. There are a lot of negatives and a lot of positives. But ultimately, I think this trade will work out for the 76ers. And I do think they can most definitely win an NBA championship. Now, of course, going over to the Brooklyn Nets. The Brooklyn Nets, they received a lot. An absolute ton. They received Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, Andre Drummond, and 2 first-round picks from the 76ers. Now, of course, going to the positive, the James Harden fiasco is finally over. Brooklyn does not have to worry about that, and they also get some much-needed perimeter defense. Ben Simmons is going to be an absolute game-changer for this team's defense. I'm really glad he's on this team. I'm glad he's in a new uniform, in a new little standout. He has a fresh start, no longer with all the distractions he created for himself or that were created for him out there in Philadelphia. He is in a new setting, and I think he fits right with this team. He won't have to be a secondary scorer. He will be a primary defender, and in my opinion, that is a place he thrives in. I think he can fill in that point guard role. I do think they did get an underrated trade in Andre Drummond, who I think could be a game changer for this team. I also think Seth Curry can be a really, really big game changer for this team. He was actually their leading scorer a couple days ago in their win. He could fill that Joe Harris role. Joe Harris has been missing pretty much the whole season. I believe he had, ankle surgery, something anything like that. Joe Harris is injured, so I do think Seth Curry would do a great job filling that shooter role, as Joe Harris and his presence and that shooting presence for the Brooklyn Nets has been really sorely missed this season. Of course, the Nets also got some draft capital, which I think is always a positive. They lost a lot of draft capital, last year, trading for, guess who? Yeah. They traded for James Harden and basically traded every single pick they have for the next couple of years. So the Nets also got 2 first-round picks out of this. I do think that is a very positive mindset and a very positive thing while looking at the Brooklyn Nets. Now, of course, the negatives. There's still a lot of distractions in Brooklyn, don't get me wrong. Kyrie Irving is still limited due to the mandate rules with COVID-19 and him not getting the vaccine. Kevin Durant is also injured, and Ben Simmons is still pretty much getting showered by negative comments from the media, and we don't know how he's going to perform. He hasn't played a basketball game in just under a year. So Ben Simmons, KD, Kyrie, there are still a lot of things that have to go on with this team. So I wouldn't count on the Nets being ultimately good straight out of the gate, but I do think in the long term this can definitely serve a very pivotal role when looking at this team. Of course, they also have a lot of ground to make up. The Nets at this point are on an 11-game losing streak. They are way down in the Eastern Conference. If they want to get back up, and if they want to have home court advantage in the playoffs, they have a lot of ground to make up. And of course, the offense could lose its balance. As you know, one thing James Harden offered this offense for the Brooklyn Nets, other than a complete locker room distraction, of course, is a point guard. They offered the Nets a point guard, and James Harden was that point guard mind. He was that guy that can get Kyrie the ball, the guy that can get KD the ball. Now, Ben Simmons, he does have that point guard mind too, but will he be able to do it at the level James Harden did while also keeping up with his production? James Harden also scored. He was also a little bit pickier on defense. Like, James Harden played a very pivotal role for this team being their point guard. I don't know if Ben Simmons can quite fill that role. However, I do know that James Harden's role was important for this Brooklyn team, and I also really think that Brooklyn is going to miss James Harden for the first couple of weeks of this trade, or the first couple of weeks of the new team, per se, getting to know each other and getting acclimated to each other. Now, of course, we're going to go to the big question, the question that you are probably asking. Micah, who won the trade? We've argued over many days who won this trade. In my opinion, the Brooklyn Nets won this trade hands down. The long-term deal definitely goes to the Nets. They have a decent amount of draft picks, while the 76ers pretty much traded their entire draft capital, also with their young star Ben Simmons, and invested in a 32-year-old, injury-prone, playoff kind of disappointment, James Harden. The Nets also covered pretty much every weakness on their team. They are inches away from being in the Eastern Conference Finals last season, so I do think they covered a huge weakness on their team, which was perimeter defense. I mean, let's face it, if KD wore a size lower shoe, this team would have been in the Eastern Conference Finals last season without the perimeter defense. Now they do have the perimeter defense, and I definitely think they did fill in some roles. Now, of course, going to the 76ers, yes, they get a great trade, don't get me wrong. James Harden's getting a little bit older. He doesn't necessarily play well in the playoffs, and we don't quite know how that hamstring is going to be handled. Rumor is James Harden is actually going to stay out past the All-Star break to rehab his hamstring, which is really concerning to me. The Sixers also traded a lot of draft capital and a lot of assets. They traded Andre Drummond, who was an effective backup center. They traded Seth Curry, who was the best shooter on that team. And also, they traded 2 first-round picks. Yeah, the Sixers gave up a lot for a pretty old 32-year-old James Harden and Paul Millsap, who pretty much can't quite do anything anymore. Let's just be honest. Paul Millsap was a great player in his prime. I'm a Hawks fan, so you know I'm very well aware of what Paul Millsap is capable of doing in his prime. But as of right now, he's pretty much just a veteran presence. No disrespect to Paul Millsap and his playing. But, of course, that's going to be the end of this video. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn on the notification bell. You guys help me out a little bit. Of course, TikTok, Spotify, audio podcast, all those links are going to be in the description. Man, oh man, was this an amazing trade. I do think the Nets did win. I think the Nets won in the long term. I do think the Nets will be in a championship very soon. However, as of right now, I do think the 76ers do have a slight advantage because they have James Harden. They have a guy in his prime. They have Joel Embiid. Another guy in his prime who's playing at an MVP level. So I do think as of right now, it's going to look like the 76ers had a better trade. They won the trade. However, when looking at the future, when looking maybe 2-3 years down the road, I think the Brooklyn Nets will win this trade, and I think we will all realize the Nets won this trade. That's why I have the Nets winning. But without further ado, I'm going to end this video. Make sure you stay loved and stay blessed, whether you follow me, subscribe to me, or not. Wish to you stay loved, stay blessed. And without further ado, I'm going to end this video. Thank you for watching.